I'm really glad to talk today to you. We did a monitoring program in Austria, which also resulted in a dose assessment. And the aim of this study was to evaluate the radiological risk to the public due to the use of wood ash as a fertilizer in gardens, as well as the necessity for regulations on imported wood in Austria. Since 2021, Latvia has a regulation on imported wood for energetic use. It contains requirements for protection against radiation in relation to the level of the radionuclides cesium-137. And it also regulates the ash produced in the Latvia incinerators. In addition to Latvia, other countries in the EU, such as Italy and Sweden, have already published similar regulations. And we wanted to know how the situation is in Austria. Do we need also some regulations for imported wood and how it's going on? We will answer this today. Are there also different waste disposal channels for wood ash in Austria? Is it all the same for all citizens? And in addition, we also carried out a dose assessment in order to base the results to the Austrian law. In Austria, we have such a map for the activity concentration of cesium-137. I looked it up for Australia, but I didn't find one, and I also asked Drew, and I don't think that you have something like that. So in the past, after the Chernobyl reactor accident, in Austria, they were taking a lot of different soil samples. These are all these tiny points here. And then it was calculated how the activity concentration of cesium-137 is in the soil for Austria. This map shows it to the reference date of the 1st May of 1986. And after the half-life time, it's about 30 years. Now this map is for 30 years later. You can still see that there are some areas with a lot of cesium-137 activity concentration, and you can also find them in the mushrooms. And it's quite different, the uptake of the cesium-137 for trees. It varies by the species and also the site conditions like soil type and moisture. And cesium-137 is more concentrated in the bark than in the hardwood, but it is also washed away by rain. The radionuclide accumulates mainly in the tree's growing parts, such as leaves, needles, and branches. And it follows the metabolic pathway of natural potassium. Its concentration is generally really there where the growing zones are. If you are interested how the different radionuclide distribution in Europe look like, you can go to this website and you have different maps here. It's quite interesting. So how is the regulation in the European Union or in Europe or in other countries? So there's no uniform regulation within the EU. But we have in general a reporting value for cesium-134 and cesium-137 of 10,000 becquerels per kilogram. The new regulation for Latvia only allows an activity concentration for cesium-137 in dry wood for 10 becquerels per kilogram. In other countries, there are a lot of different limit values. So for example, in Italy and Belgium, you have the 1000 becquerel per kilograms. And in Russia and the Ukraine, you also have limit values for strontium 90. But what is the situation in Austria? Why are we also thinking about wood and wood ash? As I mentioned above, we don't have a limit value right now. But over the last years, it gets more common to heat with wood because we need to find a solution to get away from the heating with gas and oil. The most common wood fuel in Austria is wood pellets, and pellets have the lowest ash content next to the briquettes. The ash content is normally lower than 0.5%, and the lower the ash content of wood fuels, the higher the possible accumulation of non-burnable minerals, salt, heavy metals, and also radionuclides in the ash. In Austria, we have about 42 different production sites for pellets, and the pellets production is still rising. So we are also exporting a lot of the pellets. And each year, Austrian citizens build more pellet boilers and they are getting installed. I think there's also a waiting list right now because the interest is so high and the industry is growing because we need to get away from heating with oil and gas. So to learn more about the wood fuels which can be purchased in Austria, we measured 96 samples. 69 samples of wood fuels and 20 samples of wood ash. Based on previous studies, as I mentioned just now, we had more pellets to analyze. Because the combustion process is so optimized to the specific design of the boilers and the stove, and the accumulation of the radionuclides is assumed to be the highest for the pellets. The briquettes you can think about as a bigger pellet because they are using the same products of the wood to produce briquettes as well. The chips are mostly produced by the private households by themselves. For example, the owners also own a forest behind the house and they are producing the wood chips there. And this log sample was from a concerned citizen who was also who bought the logs from the Ukraine. The 20 samples of wood ash came from the private households and also one wood-burning power plant. The ash was produced in the heating systems at the houses, and this one pellet, which we have the charged pellets here, was from a smoker, and the owner bought it from the USA. So as I mentioned, we have a sample from the USA, and all the other samples are produced in Europe. In most cases, you don't normally know where the wood is coming from, you only know the production site. In Europe, we have the production sites of Latvia, Ukraine, Romania, Serbia, Czech Republic, and Austria. But some of the Austrian sawmills also have production sites in other countries, and you don't know about that. When I got these samples from the private households, I also asked them where they dispose their ash. And it's quite an emotional topic for them. I got so many answers. My grandmother already fertilized with wood, and so I'm doing the same. But they are not considering that their grandmother fertilized with the ash of wood logs, and they are now using wood pellets, and that there might be a difference between the ash. But most of the people are still using the wood in their gardens. And we have here 7 people are using wood ash pellets. I also looked up about fertilizing with ash some sites from Australia because I think it's quite interesting to see what the different traditional thoughts are. And it's quite different at which site you can look and what they are telling you. But mostly it's like, yeah, it's good to fertilize with wood ash. I also should mention here that I think that Australia doesn't have that much an issue with the activity concentration of cesium-137, but over all sites, websites, it's always mentioned that it's important to know the soil properties in order to achieve the best fertilization results. So always look up and analyze the soil, and then you know how you should fertilize with the ash. So now we are coming to the first results. Here you have the wood fuels. We have the wood chips in blue, the log, that's the wood sample from the Ukraine. You can see the activity concentration of cesium-137 is really low compared, for example, to some wood pellets. And then we have briquettes here. We didn't do a lot of preparation because we measured them with the gamma spectrometry, and we also needed to give some pellet samples back to some organizations because they need to store them and have them as a backup. The highest value is from a wood pellet outside of Austria, but it might be possible that you could also buy it from in Austria. And the lowest activity concentration we have here, and it was from a sample from the Czech Republic. And this sample here was the charged pellets which were used for the smoker, and it were under the detection limit. You can see that the detection limit here is higher than it's on the activity concentration here. That's why we have 10 different gamma spectrometers, and so they have different properties. If we are looking now at the ash, we also did the analysis with the gamma spectrometers for cesium-137. We analyzed 27 wood ash samples, and 12 ashes were also analyzed for strontium-90. We weren't able to calculate a factor between cesium-137 in wood and in ash, or between cesium-137 in ash and strontium-90 in ash. In general, it's necessary to have more precise information of the origin of the wood, the age and the type of the wood to be able to calculate some factors. Even within a tree, the radionuclide is not distributed homogeneously. As I already mentioned above, it's the cesium-137 is mainly in the growing parts of the wood, like the leaves, the needles, branches, and the outer layers. And in a sawmill, wood sawdust and other wood waste of various types of wood are made into pellets. So it's not possible to gather knowledge about the used wood in pellets. The highest activity concentration we have for strontium-90, we have in a briquette sample, which is comparable from the production to the pellets. It's like a big pellet. And the charged wood from the smoker, in the ash, the activity concentration was under the detection limit. It was lower than 0.8 becquerel per kilogram. And all the pellet samples which are shown here, they are from Europe. Expect this one. So we did a dose assessment as the next step, and we picked out the highest activity concentrations. So for cesium-137, we used the activity concentration of 867 becquerel per kilogram. And for strontium-90, it was 1,200 becquerel per kilogram. The annual dose is normally calculated out of 5 different paths. We didn't consider the external radiation exposure pathway from being outdoors and indoors, so the local dose rate, because it was not able to measure it, and it's quite different over all Austria. The natural background in Austria varies between 70 and 200 nanosievert per hour. Furthermore, the internal radiation exposure pathway due to the inhalation of radon and its short-lived decay products was also not considered because it also depends on the site, and the main part isn't related to the ash because it's coming from the ground. We also have a map for radon in Austria, and it's also open access. The yeast dose coefficients are based on the ICRP database of dose coefficients, workers and members of the public, with the highest value chosen for selection, because the exact chemical combustion of the radionuclides in the ash samples is not known. The used radionuclide-specific arithmetic mean transfer factors are from the table 17 of the Handbook of Parameter Values for the Prediction of Radionuclide Transfer in Terrestrial and Freshwater Environment of the IAEA Technical Report Series number 4072. It was assumed that only 50% of the consumed food items are fertilized with the ash, so 50% of the vegetables the public is growing by themselves and eating them. Different dosage amounts were calculated for various age groups, considering the specific dietary intake and exposure levels. For young children, it was assumed that they have a higher likelihood of direct ash consumption due to increased playtime on the ground. If one person handles the ash indoors, it takes a maximum of 30 minutes per ash change, so to clean the boiler or the stove. I intelligently overestimated and said the ash is changed daily to account for any residual ash on the floor that could be eaten, even if the ash is only changed every 2 weeks. It will eventually be cleaned, leading to 182.5 hours. Fertilization should only occur once a year. I assumed this both the lawn and the vegetable beds are fertilized once. So over time, the ash seeps deeper into the soil due to rain and weathering, which I estimated to take 31 days. The original time spent in the garden was 1,000 hours per year, or 11% of the total annual hours. So 31 days equals 744 hours, and 11% of that are 85 hours. Since fertilization happens twice, I estimated 170 hours in the garden, during which the ash can be directly eaten. The used values will be explained in detail in a paper. I know it was right now quite some information, but I think it's important to know the time because it's essential for the dose assessment. The paper is still in progress. So I have a short conceptual model. So you have the wood at the beginning, then you burn the wood, and in the ash we consider cesium-137 and strontium-90. And I had 3 different scenarios: fertilizing with 0.01 centimeter, 0.5 centimeter, or 1.0 centimeters of ash. And the 3 different pathways I considered are inhalation of ash, ingestion of plants fertilized with the ash, and direct ingestion of ash. I consider different plants, like non-leafy vegetables, leafy vegetables, root crops, tubers, and legumes. And then I was able to calculate the total annual dose for those pathways. The calculations were performed using a Microsoft Excel form, and all formulas and data entirely were checked a lot to ensure accuracy and reliability on the results. The fertilization, the depths were corresponding to a depth of 30 centimeters of soil. So on 30 centimeters of soil, you have, for example, when you measure with, when you fertilize with the 1 centimeters, then you had in the calculation 29 centimeters of soil and 1 centimeters of ash. I chose those plants just because I looked up what is more common to plant in Austria in the gardens, and that's why I chose them. So because my poster at the ARPS 16 in Orlando was about the dose assessment, and I was specifically asked to present this, I added some calculations and formulas here. And I'm really happy to present this because normally I don't show this because it's, yeah, it needs time to understand. So we have the effective annual dose for the reference person J, yes, G, in English it's G. And for the inhalation of ash, then we have, I considered the breathing rate of the reference person, the reference value of airborne particles concentration, then the activity concentration of radionuclides R in the sieved ash sample. Because I didn't sieve the ash sample, I just used the activity concentration in the sample, which wasn't sieved, and had a factor to calculate the activity concentration in the sieved sample. Then we have G is the inhalation dose of the coefficient for radionuclide for the reference person J. T is the time, the annual time spent at the exposure site. Site is S, and A is a dimensionless factor for determining the dust concentration at the exposure site from the outdoor dust concentration. These are the results for the radiation exposure from inhaling dust outdoors and indoors, and it's the smallest contribution. Compared to the others, it's less than 1%, so it doesn't really matter. This graph here is a linear scale. I pointed out because the next ones will be in lot. It stands there. The next one is the effective annual dose for a reference person from ingestion of locally produced food. So this food was fertilized with ash. We have again, PN is a dimensionless fluctuation of locally produced food stuff in the annual consumption. So as I mentioned above, it's 0.5, so it's 50%. U is the consumption of the plant food grown in the garden for the reference person. Then we have the transfer factor from soil to plant via root uptake and activity deposition on the surface of the plant components for the radionuclide. Then C is the activity concentration of the radionuclide in the upper soil layer of 0 to 30 centimeter. So as I showed you before, we have in Austria already Cs-137 activity concentrations in the soil. So we need to subtracted. So going back to the right slide, it's this one. That's this one. That's the activity concentration in the soil, the background. And this one is the activity concentration in the soil sample and the ash at the site. And then we also have the ingestion dose coefficient for the radionuclide. Again, if we are not sieving the sample, we also have a factor like above to calculate the activity concentration in a sieved sample. So it's now this scale, I couldn't pronounce it. And it's the highest contribution to the total annual dose is from the ingestion of locally produced food fertilized with the ash. And it reaches from 60 to almost 100%. And the most part of it contributes from strontium-90. The highest contribution is about 99.5% for children under 1 year when fertilizing with 0.5 centimeters and 1 centimeter. It's yes. Then the last path I considered is the effective annual dose for a reference person from direct ash ingestion. So we have the uptake rate of the reference person for the ash. Then we have the annual time spent at the exposure site for the reference person. I talked about that above. Then we have the activity concentration in the sieved ash sample. I also showed the formula above. And then the ingestion dose coefficient for radionuclides. There's no annual dose for children under 1 year because it's considered that they are not playing on the ground yet by themselves. And the direct ingestion of ash contributes about 40% to the total annual dose for children from 1 to 2 years because they're mainly playing on the floor. And the percentage of 40% is when you're considering to fertilize with 0.01 centimeter of ash. If you are fertilizing with more ash, the contribution is less than 1.5% for all age groups. But we want to look about the annual dose more. And it's here you have the 3 types of fertilization. So we have 0.01 centimeter, the 0.5 centimeter, and the 1 centimeter of ash. On the left side here, we have the graph for children under 1 year. And already fertilizing with 1.01 centimeter ash per year results in a dose of 1 millisievert per year. But for people over 70 years, on the other hand, the dose of 1 millisievert per year is only reached when fertilization with 3.59 centimeters of ash. It should also be noted that there are different recommendations, as already mentioned, on how much ash should be used for fertilization. While the recommendation for heavy acid soils, that's a pH from 4, is to apply between 200 and 400 grams of wood ash per square meter every 3 to 4 years, the recommendation for less acid soils shifts to 100 to 200 grams within the same period. And there are also different guidelines and different recommendations, you can find a lot of information out there on the internet. So if we have a density of 0.6 gram per cubic centimeter, 5 millimeters of ash, so the middle here and here, corresponds to 5 liter or 3 kilogram of fertilizer per square meter. So we can say that that's overestimating. You wouldn't fertilize with 5 liters or 3 kilograms of ash per square meter. So it's more common to fertilize with 0.01 centimeter or maybe a bit more. But think about, if you have 3 kilograms of ash, you wouldn't see anything of your plants afterwards. So if we are looking down here, we are just thinking about the radionuclides. It's safe to fertilize with the ash, also with the pellets ash. But we want to see if we have the dose. We just calculated. We take the 5 millimeters. It's even too much ash fertilization per year because about the amount of the ash, but just to be conservative. And if we compare the dose, for example, to a transatlantic flight or to a mammographic screening, it's nothing we should be really concerned about it. But nevertheless, there are other things in the ash next to the radionuclides. So 2 papers are currently in preparation. The first paper is on monitoring, is in the review phase. I'm still waiting. I'm patient. It's now nearly over a year I'm waiting. Yeah, I think I need to send more emails and ask where they are right now. The second paper on the dose assessment is still being finalized by myself, so I will continue writing on the weekend and I will submit it to a different journal when I'm finished. So, do we need now some regulations for imported wood in Austria? That was a main question for the government in Austria, and the results show that we don't need a limit. The government was quite happy, so they don't need to change anything. But still, also if we are not considering the radionuclides, we do not recommend to fertilize the garden with wood pellets ash or briquette ash, because during my research, I talked to so many people who are experts in wood and in burning of the wood, and they told me there are so many heavy metals and non-burnable salts and other things in the ash from pellets that it's not healthy for the people to fertilize it and risk something for their health. Right now, I'm sampling some heating plants and combined heat and power plants because these are industrial sites. And in the last 7 months, I have now about 41 different ash samples. And it would be good to have the ash back in the circular economy, because right now, most of the ash is deposited and so the factories are paying for it. But you can also use ash as a building material. So we are quite keen to see how we can use the ash from the industry, for example, in building a road or something else. And we also want to do a dose estimation for the workers, and also analyze some alpha emitters. That will be the third paper I write, and then I hope to finish my PhD. I hope I could give you some insight to my PhD, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. Thanks a lot for listening.